convert to China. This was not ambiguous. This is clear. In Potsdam, the final conference just after the defeat of the Germans, but before the defeat of the Japanese, the Cairo conference conclusions and determinations were reconfirmed in Potsdam, Germany, by the leaders of Russia, Britain, and the United States. So the idea that Taiwan is part of one China is historically accurate, and it is also reconfirmed in World War II. And then it was reconfirmed in the constitutions, as I said, of both the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. The issue wasn't whether there were two separate countries. The issue was who governed a unified China. So the issues about independence are recent issues. It is ahistorical to question this point, actually. It is a current development. One could argue whatever about the current situation, but the history is not an ambiguous history. Of course, as Orwell said, he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. So there's a lot of attempt to manipulate the past history. But I think, looking from the outside, that this is a question of who rules China, not a question of two Chinas. Of course, the evolution of the two places is quite different. One can very much admire Taiwan's achievements and so forth. One can abjure any kind of force. That all makes sense. But this questioning about one China and two Chinas, not only a questioning of the diplomacy of the last 50 years, but I would say the history of the last 300 plus years. And so this I just wanted to put on the table. Now, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the United States was arming Taiwan. And in a communique in 1982, the United States said it would continue to arm Taiwan, but at a diminishing rate, that it would phase out its military support. Well, now we are 43 years later, and the drumbeat of arming Taiwan, and the expression is like a porcupine, so that the mainland wouldn't be able to occupy Taiwan, grows in Washington. That's mostly a geopolitical game, if I could put it that way. Politicians in Washington don't care very much about other places. They care about American power, American influence, American prestige. They care about the fact that America's backing of Taiwan, in their view, is vital for the confidence of Japan and Korea in the American-led defense of those two countries and in America's presence in East Asia. So they see Taiwan a bit like they see Ukraine, as a matter of American prestige, credibility, ability to project power. Taiwan per se, I don't think is high on almost anybody's mind in Washington. They're geographically ignorant, culturally ignorant, and very inward looking, so they don't really care about any other place in my experience in dealing with these politicians. But they do see America's prestige on the line. And when you talk about prestige, you know how easily that can convert to war. And then when war starts, the prestige question becomes even more important. The dominoes will fall. All terrible things will happen if we don't stand up for our prestige. Well, this is, of course, the ruin of countries and the ruin of the world, this kind of talk. So I would say, yes, it would be a kind of accidental war, but not an accidental motive. The motive is U.S. power, U.S. presence in East Asia, U.S. determination, U.S. demonstration to Japan, to Korea, to Australia, to the Philippines, to Southeast Asia. We are there. We will not be moved. We won't let China, meaning the PRC, bully us around. Those are the motives right now that drive the U.S.
It just seems that given the history which you outlined, that you can always have a solution between Taiwan and mainland China in terms of enhanced autonomy or something, but it's the geopolitics that complicates it. As you said, with Ukraine, the objective, I guess, is to create a Europe without Russia to push them into Asia. But with Taiwan, Taiwan is very important to the regional security architecture as part of this island chain, and also as a possible way of putting this economic containment of China, and especially now that it's becoming more difficult to compete economically.
Well, this raises another point that is in line with what we've been discussing, but two more features that are important. First, in the mainland view, the outside world is out to weaken or destroy or divide China. This is not wrong, and it's also part of the historical experience. It's not strictly right in that this may refer to some intemperate politicians in the United States mainly, but they're there. That's real. So China has its so-called century of humiliation, in which outside powers divided, weakened, and in many ways devastated China, starting with the British, as is usually true, in 1839 in the First Opium War. Then there was the French and British in the Second Opium War at mid-century. There was a great civil war in China that emerged from that, the Taiping Rebellion, as it's called by Western historians. But that was perhaps the largest civil war in world history, with tens of millions of deaths. Then there was the incursions at the end of the century, the most dire of which was the Japanese invasion of China in 1894-95, in which both Taiwan was lost and Korea was on the first step to becoming a colony, which happened in 1910. Then, of course, Japan invaded China in 1931 and devastated China in war until 1945, with tens of millions of people, or estimated between 10 and 20 million people dead in World War II as a result of the Japanese war. So from the Chinese perspective, never again will China be divided from the outside. And so there's a particular neuralgia about Taiwan. Oh, look, they're at it again. They're out to weaken us. They're out to divide us. This was a complete devastation. From the U.S. side, the U.S. Has been a foe of communist China because the U.S. has this deep anti-communism in its mentality, even when the term is in the Chinese characteristic, so-called. This is a super sophisticated mixed economy, private capital galore, mixed economy, a public sector as well. But in the U.S. mentality, communism has been the evil for a century since the Bolshevik Revolution. And in the case of China, already with the founding of the People's Republic of China, the U.S. backed Taiwan in this war against communism. And then in 1951, John Foster Dulles, who would go on to become the fervent anti-communist foreign minister, Secretary of State of the United States under Dwight Eisenhower, identified the so-called First Island Chain, which is a chain, an archipelago that the United States would defend, including Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, Guam. And this idea was, if the U.S. controls this chain, it limits China's access, including submarine access and naval access more generally, to the wider Pacific Ocean. It hems China in. It threatens China's sea routes. It makes possible chokeholds over China's food supplies coming from abroad and its energy resources coming from abroad. That first island chain became part of U.S. military doctrine. China understands that. This is, again, part of this uh, right now, almost a Cold War, or maybe a Cold War between the U.S. and China. And so this is another reason uh, why there's this depth, not only maybe I left an impression of symbolism of American power or desire to weaken China, but military doctrine and strategic doctrine, and on the Chinese side, a deep awareness of history and a determination not again to be subjected to the Western powers, which did such devastation, or Japan, which, as it itself said at the end of the 19th century, joined the Western imperial club.
I think this history and ideology is very important because when you end up in a strategic situation where winner takes all and neither side is willing to give an inch, you usually wandering into very dangerous territory. And when it involves the two greatest power in the international system, we do have a problem. But yeah, Professor Sachs, thank you so much as always for your time. I know
Well,
you're a
thank
very
you.
busy man, so I'll want to have more of your time.
Just to say, we need above all prudence and peace here, because if it were not for the U.S. meddling, I'm quite sure that across the straits there would be a solution to these issues that is peaceful, sensible, and especially pragmatic. And if the world, and God help us, politicians in the United States, are pragmatic and prudent, then peace will prevail. If they are delusional, as they were in Ukraine, hot-headed, arrogant, reckless, uh, provocative, then Taiwan could become a flashpoint and a very dangerous one.